It's obvious it says all for his glory alone. It doesn't say all for your my glory or your glory. But
And
he's doing that because they, it's kind of they like to do stuff like that. I'm like,
is, why is there a gender? Why isn't it androgynous? All for its glory? But it makes it sound like a thing, an object, not a subject. Anyway, I think we should get on to topic. Uh, so, all for his glory. Do you know much about the mind-brain problem? It's not actually a problem, in my opinion.
I'm just here to listen because I find it a very interesting topic. So
Well, it wasn't. I mean, if you go to, I have a degree in psychology, and they just do not teach dualism anymore. Dualism being that the mind is a separate thing from the brain. I believe the brain is the mind. They're one and the same. So if you have a brain, you can have a mind, so the mind's an emergent property of the brain. So, but before, when Descartes posed, he was the first to come up with this idea that he realized that he had consciousness. That's all he really knew for sure. I think, therefore I am. Um, what is it? De rerum naturam, something like that. You're a Belgium, you should know that. Even though he's not from there, I'll just blame you. Yeah, so basically the mind-brain problem has been sort of resolved if you accept that on a fundamental level the brain can be reduced to materialism. There's no ghost in the machine. There's no soul. It's basically electrochemical impulses hitting proteins which wind and release enzymes, and that's just one cell. And each cell, remember, has
organic
10,000
compounds reacting with
connections.
their environment. Yeah.
I'm just going to give you a sense of scale of your brain first. So you have. Does anyone know how many brain cells you have? Because it's actually
Yeah.
quite amazing. It's 100 billion, or could be 200 billion. We haven't actually counted them. We do what astronomers do. You get like a 1 square millimeter, and then you just extrapolate. But it varies because parts of the brain are way more dense than others. Like the cerebellum has like 100 million or something neurons, whereas other parts have much less, a tenth of that. And also, so each neuron though is connected to the other neurons. Like a good analogy that I'll use is think of a forest. The trunks of the trees are neurons, and the vines and the branches are the dendrites. Now, the dendrites are where all the interesting stuff happens, because that's where they actually physically connect. They don't actually physically touch. There's physically empty space in between these synapses, and uh, the most important neurotransmitter for consciousness, which is how we can explain the mind with using materialism, is we know how an electrical signal goes down an axon, down a dendrite, and then that releases a serotonin molecule or a bunch of them, and then there's a whole bunch of receptors on the other side of this little gap. And if enough of the serotonin molecules land in the receptors, serotonin receptors, by the way, are very rare. They're about 1 or 2% of all your neurotransmitters. 90% of them are GABA and glutamate, but they don't really do much that's important for consciousness. Like they don't do creativity or mood or emotion or love or intellect or things that make us human, right? They're all controlled by serotonin in a large way, but not serotonin per se, because the receptor that serotonin binds to is almost always called a G protein receptor or a 7-trans membrane receptor protein, because it's like a wiggly worm going through 7 membranes. It's actually really big. In the diagrams, they draw the protein really small, but it's like 1,000 times bigger than the serotonin molecule, which molecules, as you probably know, are tiny. You can't we've only just found out how to see them with super resolution. But now we've got to the G protein stage.
So Brady,
What
is
happens?
this a hangout or what?
Hold on. Yeah, you guys can have the floor for the rest of the hangout. I just got to lay the groundwork.
Yeah,
And
then
I'm gonna follow with stupid shit because I don't understand jack shit about this.
yeah, and unfortunately, Brady, I hate
way over my head.
Brady, just let me say one. Brady, listen, it's your
Dr.
fault.
Brady.
You went on air. You didn't tell us you were going on. You didn't tell me you were going on air when you went on air, and then you
read the chat. I did warn you secretly.
Okay, that's fine. I guess I'm going to leave.
No, man, stay. It's good to have you here.
Okay, what I'm trying to say to you, and I'm not angry or upset. It's just very hard when you try to say something and people aren't listening. You went on there for about 10, 15 minutes, and both of us were trying at different points to talk to you because what happened was I was trying to say something to you because you went live and you didn't say you're going live. You just went live, and then all of a sudden you're going off on your thing. And he was trying to say stuff, and I was trying to say stuff, and probably a lot of what you said is going to be blanked out, the audio, when you get to the recorded version. My advice to you. My advice to you in the future, and I'm not trying to control your hangout, I'm just telling you this. My advice.
No, please, give me all the feedback you can, mate. It's all good.
My opinion, in the future, if you're going to invite guests to your hangout prior to going on air, you have to. I would disclose to them what you're going to be talking about, so that they know whether or not that's an area of their expertise or something they know, and they have an idea of what they're talking about, instead of just going live and going into this long thing with technical language when I might not even be interested in the subject matter or not even have anything to really say about it. So it's kind of like you should have kind of like, this is what we're going to talk about. This is the position I'm kind of. What's your position, so we can kind of understand where we're coming from, and then boom, we'll go live. It makes more sense than just me and Dr. Evil sitting back listening to.
Yeah, exactly. Me just talk to say things that only I understand. I get it. I think that, basically the mind-brain problem, that's basically what this was going to be about. But I don't mind covering any other topic that you guys want to bring up if you have a topic or something that's happened. It's just basically, this is the first. I've done lots of pre-recorded ones where I just sort of read from the Quran as from like a reasonable, rational perspective, or do interview people, or just myself updating people on news. It's never been a live hangout, so I'm used to. You know what I mean? So I've sort of.
And I'm not putting down what you brought up, because there are people who are more knowledgeable about the things you're talking about that could talk to a level. The fact that I or the other individual in the room here may not be up to that level in those areas doesn't mean that we don't have a position on what you're talking about.
Yeah. Totally.
I can tell you very clearly that I can discuss the difference between the mind and the brain. But I'm not going to be.
What's your thoughts on that, please?
Okay, well, if you're finished, I don't want to overstep what you're doing. I just kind of wanted to catch you, because
I just wanted to wrap up what happens with when it hits when the molecule hits the receptor. So the protein changes shape, and we used to think it was like maybe a binary thing, like computers, where it could go on or off. But it turns out that depending on what hits the receptor, it can sort of switch up the signaling protocols in several different ways, not just binary, but like many different ways. So this just adds to the complexity. But now, yeah, please give us your thoughts.
I'm assuming your position from all that would be that you would be into what would be kind of in the biological chemical determinism category, where
materialism, basically. But I was taught there was no ghost in the machine. In my textbooks, it was all materialism. But that can't be proven yet, because we don't actually understand how a single cell works entirely. Because what happens after a G protein does its business, we don't know. Because that just won the Nobel Prize in 2012. Actually, this is why you guys. I mean, I just just read up on it recently. I didn't know what a G protein was a few months ago.
Right. Now, I do know individuals that could discuss the proteins and stuff with you. I'm not one of those, so I'm going to discuss it
No,
with you.
no. But you can
I'm
discuss
going
the
to
mind-body problem.
yeah, I'm going to discuss it with you and from a little bit of a different angle.
How do you
Uh,
see it?
well, when you're talking about those things, although I can't get into the different chemicals and how they work and all that, though
No,
I'm
no, no. You
aware
don't need
of.
to.
Okay, just let me know because when you're ready for me to speak, because it's really hard to keep stopping. So just let me know when you're ready. Are you ready?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not trying to be rude. It's just, there's a thought pattern. See, because we're talking about the brain and the mind, right? So I want to use my brain and my mind, but I have to complete a thought pattern. Um, there's, like I said, there are people I know that kind of know the different chemical properties and how they work in the brain. They could talk about that side of it. I can't do that, so although I'm aware of some of it, I'm not aware of it enough to discuss it from that angle, so I'm going to discuss it from a different angle. Um, When you look at anything through science, whether it be the chemicals in the brain, the way the brain structure works, the firing of neurons and things like that, you're observing activity, and you are, let's say, you're observing certain emotions in somebody, and they can do a scan on the brain, they see certain activity that goes on in the brain. That explains what happens during that activity. It doesn't explain. Uh, it doesn't explain the everything about the thought. And so the idea of a biological chemical determinism that's a hard determinism is this idea that everything really reduces down to a brain fart. It's little things that fire and shoot are random. They're random in the sense not that they don't have their own structure, but they're random to you. You don't control them. They just fire however, and this determines what you think and feel and believe and everything. But that's maybe would be interesting to get into in that discussion because I would have.
So can I just sort of nutshell what you said? Because that's an
Sure.
interesting point. So basically you're saying like just because the brain is doing these physical processes is that doesn't necessarily follow that like a change in the cell, right, is going to translates into love or emotion or some human trait that we can't pin down in the brain. Because actually, no one can tell you where consciousness is in the brain. So this is a big problem for the mind-body person who wants to be a materialist like me, because you can just say that, well, point to where the mind is, but I will just point to the brain because
Right.
because I can destroy parts of the brain and you lose parts of your mind. So they're
And
obviously.
I would be with you in the sense that the mind is within the brain, and that's the way God designed the mind to be when it's in this meat suit. It's limited by the brain. Outside of the body, outside of the brain, it's not limited. So I do believe that it operates within. But let me ask you this question:
Shoot.
You say you're a materialist, and
Yes, sir.
but do you believe in thoughts?
I don't have any choice. I've experienced them.
Okay, so do you believe in opinions?
I don't believe in opinions. People have them.
Okay, but are thoughts and opinions material?
This is a good question.
The
I
thought
can't.
itself, not
All
what
right.
produces the
Yeah,
thought, but
I
the
know what
thought
you're
itself.
saying. Like, you know that basically what you're saying is subjectivity riding around in your sentient mind. Like that's not a physical thing. It seems. It feels like it's not a physical thing, doesn't it? And there's no evidence to prove that it isn't, but there's lots of evidence that
Actually,
infers that it is.
there actually is evidence that it's not physical, because the thing that people are
Such as.
misunderstanding. Well, let me just hear me out real carefully. The thing that people are missing is no one said that there isn't a physical element involved in the process of thinking. No one said that because your brain fires pistons. There's circulation to your brain. If you lose oxygen to your brain, you can become unconscious, things like that. So we know that there's a physicality involved in thought, but the thought itself is not physical, just like a dream is not physical.
I
Uh,
would I
Is it
would
not
submit they
just
are
produced
physical.
by the environment, yeah, by other external things?
well, how much does a dream weigh?
You
Okay,
can't
so
weigh a dream, I think. No.
it's not an abstract concept like say the absence of something, like nothing is it's not an abstract thought like that. It's when the brain is in a certain state, we experience uh, the result of that process as consciousness.
Yeah. So the physical brain
Yeah.
creates an environment by which a metaphysical event happens. The event itself is not physical. You can't weigh, like when you say, people say, I have emotions. Well, hold on. People say, I have emotions. Well, how much do emotions weigh?
Well, I can
Uh,
tell you how much they weigh.
how big are they? Like, what
I can tell
color?
you. They, your brain, if is okay. So the prefrontal cortex, your forehead, is where a lot of this activity takes place. So a lot of it goes on there. You could weigh that part. You could see
You can
what's
weigh the brain.
active during an fMRI and see and you could weigh that because the mind
And
is the brain for.
I've had a brain tumor, so I've had an MRI. But what you're
Oh,
missing
cool.
again, but what you're missing again is you're in agreement with me, and you don't even realize that you're in agreement with part of what I said. The brain, you can measure the brain, you can weigh the brain. You cannot measure or weigh a thought or a dream because those things are metaphysical things that may be produced by a physical thing. But what the
That
physical thing produces is a metaphysical thing. So the metaphysical does exist. Even if you're an atheist, you don't have to believe in God to believe in the metaphysical.
All right. Let me make an analogy for you. Okay, let's think of a computer. Is the information stored on a computer? Is that a physical thing? Because it's not actually. It's just electricity flying around in there. Electrons going around. It's not actually a physical. It's what you're saying, but it
So,
is a physical thing.
so live on the air, you're going to compare a
Absolutely.
computer doesn't that
Computer.
doesn't that is not sentient, that does not think, that only
No, no.
that
Let's assume it is sentient for the
It
sake.
does follow
why would
certain pathways, like your
Ease.
neuron follow your nervous system. It's the same in a computer. It follows the data stream.
computers
Is it-
don't? It's a categorical fallacy because a computer doesn't have dreams or emotions. We know this because we created
Mhm.
the computer. We know that.
You,
The
that's
problem is
we don't know that. No, how
we,
can you know that?
we do know it because we're the ones that people built computers. They know what they do and what they don't do. They basically just uh, produce back information that we put in there. They're not thinking on themselves. Even yeah, I know we have a lot of sci-fi movies that we can go to, but just like atheists automatically assume the Bible is mythology and stuff. Why are we going to go to the mythology of the movies to explain science?
Yeah, no. Um, yeah, but are you've already made the assumption that computers can't become sentient like humans can. The brain is basically a computer. It does it by a different process. It does it with carbon chemistry instead of
Right, but remember
silicon.
there's a difference. But remember, I said in the beginning of my comments, I talked about you have the brain, and then you have what the brain produces, and you have certain things that are produced that are metaphysical. Now, whether or not you want to,
They're not metaphysical.
they're not.
There are
There's no
certain things you're
evidence
in
either
control
way.
of, and certain things you're
You're
not in
choosing.
control of.
The number two is
Right.
metaphysical, by the way.
Carlo, what was that?
Well, there are certain things of your mind that you're in control of thought processes. You can think active, but you can have inactive thought. I don't know how to explain, but
Subconscious.
Okay,
subconscious, yes.
have you ever
Yeah.
seen the number two?
And
What?
your conscious mind is actually like a few seconds behind your subconscious mind. So your subconscious mind does a lot of the decision making, and then you experience the oh wow, I've decided something, but really your brain decided it for you like a second ago, unconsciously.
Okay.
That's pretty cool. That gets rid of free will.
I can only say it so many different ways, and I may not be using the 100% exact correct language at the moment, and you know why, because before we went on air, I told you why. Um,
Mm.
but I think with the misunderstanding, I think it's just a misunderstanding that we're having. We do have different opinions, obviously, but I think it's a misunderstanding to where even a person who is not a theist, and I am a Christian. I'm what people call a Calvinist, although I don't like that label. I like sovereign grace better. I think it's more accurate. Um,
Mhm.
there are people who are not theists, people who are, atheist, whatever, agnostic, whatever, that do believe that there's things like the number two. The number two, no one has ever seen the number two. No one has ever weighed the number two. No one has ever touched the number two. Because what you see on a chalkboard when somebody writes the number two is a symbol that symbolizes the number two. The concept of number two is metaphysical. You cannot weigh it. You cannot taste it. You cannot touch it. You cannot. It doesn't exist in the physical world. It's a metaphysical concept
Like an
construct.
idea.
That's
Yeah.
according to your philosophy, but science tells us that mental
Science,
processes are physical things because they only occur when a physical process in the brain happens, and you can predict what physical process will cause what change in consciousness will result from that process.
so give me a scientist, and there will be one, but give me a few reputable scientists to look at that
I've
will
got a
tell you.
degree in psychology, so I know the basics.
I know,
If you
but
have,
can I at least finish my question so you can answer something that you actually
yeah.
know I said? Okay.
Just let me say, I don't understand what one's theological predilections have to do with the mind-body problem. I mean,
Well, first
I
off, I'm the one.
they could plant your opinions, but but at the end of the day, we have to rely on what we can prove and what we can't prove.
Okay, and wasn't I the one just a few minutes ago that said you don't have to be a theist, you can be an atheist or agnostic or someone who doesn't believe in God, and to understand that there is the metaphysical? I'm the one that took it outside of religion, so why are you somehow turning it around as if I'm bringing
Yeah.
it into religion?
Do you find that because I mean, if I believed in God, I would be much more inclined to think that the consciousness is it's too bizarre to not have some sort of meta explanation like you seem to want.
The people
But
that have
I
people
agree
that
there is the metaphysical, but you can actually measure thought processes in the brain by EEG or MRI and etc. You can see
it,
the
it,
parts of the
it, what
brain
is it?
getting active, and you can measure this.
Okay, and what is it that you're measuring? You're measuring what I said earlier. You're measuring whenever
Uh,
you. Okay,
the,
go ahead. You answer for me. Go ahead. And then you guys let me know when you want me to advocate for you my opinion. But go ahead.
no,
all
go
right,
ahead.
so if I just
No, no, no.
just
I want. Okay, here's the thing. People accuse me of this all the time, but I think it's because I go into a lot of sloppy hangouts. If you're gonna ask me something, and then not really let me answer it, then when I'm quiet, you go to another topic or another subject or another aspect. That's like running around stomping out matches. Why don't we deal with one thing at a time? Okay. The thing we're
well,
dealing with.
it works for me.
Okay.
No, so do you believe that aliens can have consciousness?
Yeah, people from Mexico and Canada and Iraq.
No. The aliens that we like. No,
Well, see,
no.
there I have to make an ass out of myself and assume that there are life forms on other planets, and that would be an assumption without
Yeah, but
without.
we'll just grant that though. Grant that, and then that. It's like granting that computers can be sentient. They would?
Yeah, but here's the thing. I know people do it for fun, and it is fun sometimes. But in these kind of conversations, I find that hypotheticals are really they just derail things because a hypothetical is a hypothetical for a reason because it doesn't exist. It's not a real reality. So why
That's
would we waste
true.
our time with fantasy?
Well, I think that hypotheticals can actually shed light via inferences onto real phenomena. So consciousness can't be exactly pinned down in the brain, but we know that it's in. Will you agree that the mind is in the brain or in the skull somewhere? Yeah.
I would say that the mind and the brain are two separate things, but
Yeah.
the mind is at the brain's. I'm trying to think of the word here. When the mind is in the body, it needs the brain to be self-aware. Okay,
And what
so
happens when the brain dies then?
the mind still goes on, exists, but see, that's another
How?
category. That's going to be getting into what you sounded like a few minutes ago. You don't want to get into, which is the religious aspect. So,
Yeah, no,
if
no,
you,
no, no. But just I'll just touch on it real quick because, and I won't. I'm very kind. So if God's real and true, and let's assume He is, that's cool. But you don't have to be a dualist. Believe that the mind and brain are separate things, um, to still have all your theological niceties.
you don't have to be religious to believe that in the metaphysical, because lots of the pagan
No.
world lots of the pagan world, including Aristotle and Plato and all those, and Socrates and all those people that we bow down to, and logic and philosophy.
I kneel in front and unzip their fly,
Yeah,
especially Socrates.
they believed in the metaphysical. Um,
Yeah.
so, but here's where I think the misunderstanding comes in, because I really believe, I hate to use that phrase believe because it can be twisted to mean, I have confidence
Yeah.
that you do actually believe in the metaphysical. You're just labeling it as something else. Um, because I think, as a person that you said you're studied and you went to school and you've taken all these psychology classes and stuff, you know very well that when I go to sleep and I have a dream, that my brain can be just firing off a bunch of information, and that's what I see. Correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Now, one more thing. I just want to say one more thing. That part you and I would agree with. But what I'm seeing is not physical. The physical produces something that is not physical,
Mhm.
uh, that affects me, and then I have an opinion about it. So when I wake up and I go, "Wow, that was a effed up dream," or "That was a whatever dream," my opinion or my thought is metaphysical. It can be expressed physically through my tongue and my vocal cords and all that kind of stuff. But the thought that I use is metaphysical. It's not the brain. The brain doesn't have a mouth, and the brain doesn't have certain things.
They
You know
call
what I'm
that
trying?
But the
imagination.
brain controls everything else, apart
Yeah,
from what the gene
control
builds it, but it controls it from there on in, really.
your movement of your arms, your movement of your legs, your eyes, your
Yeah.
your
And then
moods.
you're making a special plea for consciousness because it's so mysterious. And just because we don't understand something, you can't. You're sort of you're not explaining it. You're saying that
I'm
it
using
must be dualism.
I'm using the everyday man's explanation, but there are people I
Most
know.
people are dualists, actually.
Yeah, but there are people I do know that do have degrees and stuff, that if I can talk to one and see if he'd be willing to talk to you, but they have degrees that can go into that whole specific. I'm talking just in common language, so I'm not trying to be
Yeah. No, you're
hy-
doing great.
I'm not trying to be hyper precise with my language, but I think the concepts themselves are the same, which is, I think a guy with a PhD and a guy with a high school education can both understand that their physical body does things, and the physical body moves your arms, and I mean your brain and stuff helps to move your arms. It sends signals. It helps to move your legs.
Yeah.
If you take certain drugs, it can affect your thought process and things like that. We all agree on that part.
Oh
But
yeah.
when we're
Certainly the
talking
last
about
part.
right, but when we're talking about things like the number two, or we're talking about the thought itself. For example, I got this a lot when I used to go street evangelizing down in Santa Monica. I used to get things like, I only believe in what I can see. And I go, well, that's not true. And they say, well, what do you mean? I go, because you can't see that thought, and yet you believe it. Because
Yeah.
that thought's not physical. You can't see it.
I'll just get back to a question you posed earlier. You said, what does sort of a thought weigh? Well, if you put someone in one of these machines, you hook them up, and you measure the activity in the brain whilst they're having that thought, and whatever that weighs is what the thought would weigh. If
Or
materialism is true, or if your version is true, then the physical process is giving rise to some other thing that we have no grasp on at the moment in the scientific community. I mean, because no textbook that I've seen in psychology has said, since like after Freud recommends dualism.
Okay.
It just isn't popular because it doesn't, because we can't explain it.
If everybody's brain is an individual determined machine of basically farts, then why do you believe that you should be communicating anything you just said to me?
It's a rather crude way of describing the brain, but yeah.
It's called reduction.
I just think your brain reacts to external impulses from outside, and
Why would
there it responds differently for everyone.
But why would you?
Dr. Evil's right.
But why would you waste your time trying to change my chemical responses when they're pre-programmed and they're determined and they're just physical brain farts? Why do you?
Can't, you mean, so what, do you believe in free will?
Are they pre-programmed?
Absolutely no, no.
We absolutely are pre-programmed. What happens? Okay, think of it this way: you have your brain is in one state right now.
Wait, I thought you were
in another state. You can predict that state if you map the brain. We haven't mapped the brain yet. We've only mapped tiny parts of it. We've only begun to map it. It'll be harder to map than a galaxy.
I thought you were a determinist.
Oh, I am.
Okay, so then why are you bringing up this thing called free will? You trying to place both sides of the field?
No, I don't believe in free will.
Well, then you can't be a determinist.
Yes, I can.
Determinism
means that everything is like clockwork. You can predict it. You can. It's
what you feel.
It's deterministic.
What you feel, what you think, what you decide, everything you believe is all programmed by your biology. So where's the free will?
I think we have a free will in the form of a emergency brake, so we can always say, "Oh no!" at the last moment, take another decision. Due to circumstances, if you the fail-safe theory, no.
Who's pulling the emergency brake? Because you're pre-programmed to be that way. So why would you pull the emergency brake when you're pre-programmed to be the other way?
Well,
how do you come to the conclusion that you're pre-programmed?
I'm going off of. I'm not teaching that philosophy. I'm a determinist in a different way. I'm not a naturalist. He's a naturalist, and he's a naturalist who's trying to believe in free will, and that's a contradiction.
No, I said I don't believe in free will.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, no, man. I mean, yeah, you're right. They are a contradiction to hold both views.
There is no such thing as free will. There never has been. There's never been.
There's glad never been we agree on that. And that's backed up by psychology. I mean, it's not just backed up by physics, where quantum mechanics is deterministic if you plot it statistically, right? But in psychology, we've got another line of evidence to get rid of free will, and that's with these fMRIs. You put them in there, and they get them to push a button or whatever, and you can predict which button they're going to push, and you tell them which button they're going to push before they're aware of it. So you've basically read their mind.
Okay, but at the same time, you as someone who is you are not an omniscient, omnipotent person, so you can only go off of what you observe, and your observation is based on your limited senses, and your senses could be working incorrectly and you don't even know it. And so there's a lot of things that are stepping in the way of you having arriving at truth naturalistically, because in order, you as a rationalist or as a naturalist would say that you determine your reality through your senses, your probably your sight, smell, touch, all those things. The problem is, you would also agree with me probably that some people's senses don't work correctly, because we do have blind people, and we do have deaf people, and we do have people that can't smell things correctly and all that. So how do you know that what do you use to determine whether or not your senses are working correctly?
Well, this comes down to the problem of it's almost solipsistic. You can't actually know if my red is your red. These are fundamentally, you can't prove them.
Well, how do you
both agree that that's red, okay? But it's only because we concur that it is red. If you said it was blue and I said it was red, we wouldn't know what color it is. But we agree because we basically have the same eyes and the same visual cortex.
But we do know in science that there are certain waves of light or waves of sound and different things.
True.
That
yes, and
okay,
sorry.
go ahead.
Yeah, well, those wavelengths you can. Your eye has about 3 different color receptors, and you can make a million different colors in the brain with those 3. So our brains can perceive 1 million colors.
So the reason why we know someone is colorblind or that something is wrong with their eyes is because we have been able to scientifically see that their sound waves and radiation things from light work a certain way, and so if they are received in the same way, then the result will be similar. And though someone may see a slight difference in shade, you could get a room full of people together and agree that something is red if their eyes are working.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that actually, because this will tie in, because the studies they've done where they will put electrical charges into someone's brain, specific areas that control vision and things like this, and people will see things if you hit the right spot. You'll see a horizontal line. It's called a geon. This is how you form a model of reality. You make little tiny shapes and then you just build them up on top of each other.
I actually find it fascinating that every color is perceived by everyone as the same in the same way. Red is the same for you as it is for someone else.
Well,
if you
Dr.
you're
Evil,
not gonna say blue is red.
The ancient Socrates would disagree with you there. He would say the sky isn't blue. He would say it's bronze.
Or what people wrote about what Socrates said would disagree because we don't have any.
Yes, right. But ancient Greeks believed it was bronze, not blue. But it still would be blue in the wavelength sense that you mean. Or what should I call you? The quick A for his G.
Well, just to
glory.
Yeah, or you can call me James. It's fine. That's my real name, James. So
okay, cool, James.
But what Dr. Evil was saying there, which it was actually pretty profound, and I think it was accurate.
It's always profound.
Okay, but you have to. Here's the thing. A lot of times people, it's how you say something and how it's heard by somebody else, and people can talk past each other. Here's the main thing. There are certain light and sound work a certain way. And we know this through science. You know, the rationalist and the naturalist that always tout science, 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 but yet when it comes to these things and they want to get philosophical about it, they forget science. The old question, does a tree in the forest, when it falls, make a sound if no one's there to hear it? Yes, it does. Why?
Well, this has troubled Einstein a lot because...
There's no troubled answer.
No, well, what did Einstein say? He said, I still believe the moon's there even if I'm not looking at it, because one interpretation of quantum mechanics is that literally, there has to be an observer. I think an observer to witness it. I have to talk to physics on that one.
So your penis,
my guy.
Your penis doesn't exist right now because you're.
No, I don't believe that's true because I believe what Einstein believes in that regard. But the problem with quantum mechanics is like a dozen different interpretations.
Could I make my point before you refute it or try to?
And how do you know I might support it?
You might be supporting it, but you're making an argument before I even made my point. I went to the forest for a minute, and it wasn't to visit the Ewoks. It was basically to show a similarity between that and what you're talking about with color. So, when a tree falls in the forest, it creates a vibration, and those waves are what we call sound. Yeah. Now, where the question is... Go ahead.
I have to jump in, I'm sorry, but because you're talking about vision and sound. These are all things that consciousness... These are all traits of consciousness, okay? And so you're saying that they're physical things. Then it just gets hit by the brain, and then it gets built into a reality simulation.
Thank you. But Brady, when you bring up something like color and talk about it, and I have something to say about it, and then I guess you're just suddenly deciding that you don't have the patience to listen to it. So now you're going to go back to the original thing that we talked about. Pick something.
It's not
Pick
about patience. I've got all
well,
the
pick
patience in
some,
the world.
pick
It
something and stay on it. Pick something and stay on it because I would love to be able to.
Someone commented they want to get back to the dual
Well, guess what?
mind-body problem, which is sort of what we're leading back to, I think.
Well, guys, I'm probably going to go
What's
because
Cartesian dualist,
I'm
Doctor
probably
Evil?
going to go. I'm going to
No,
go because
no, James, it's nice having your
here because I
your
haven't finished.
opinion.
I haven't finished one point. There's a reason why I'm going to the tree in the forest because it ties into the red thing that you said. And then when we're done with that which you brought up, I'm going to bring that over to why the difference between metaphysical and physical, back to the original point. But the only reason why it takes 20 minutes is because you keep stopping me. I don't think I've finished a complete thought about anything. I know I've talked a lot because
I think you've talked more than I have. You said I talked for 15 minutes at the start. I talked for 5.
Okay. All right.
So
Well,
your sense of time is being warped by your dualism. I'm just joking
So now,
with you, James.
yeah.
I mean, if you had have asked me 100 years ago, I would have said, yeah, dualism is definitely true.
I'll tell you right now.
And maybe it'll change.
Okay, I'll tell you right now, this is not a physical thing. If you don't have structure to Hangouts, they're just going to go all over the place. The reason why I'm talking so much is because I have to fight to finish a point. If you were to say,
you do not have to fight. You just have to. You just have to. No. You said you have to fight to finish a point.
What are you doing right now?
I'll give you a minute to finish your thought. Go ahead.
And what are you doing right now? You're doing exactly
James,
what
James wants to. Oh, sorry, Joe wants to say something. I think so.
I know. I want.
Yeah, take your time, and then we'll head it over to Joe.
Stop. You can stop already. You already said it 6 times. I want Joe to talk.
7 now.
Okay, bye. This is ridiculous.
I'm joking, James. Please go. We've got time, man.
Okay. I just want to make sure you're not going to start talking as soon as I start talking. Okay. I want Joe to be able to say things, and that's why I was going to suggest to you that you say something, and then you say, Joe, what's your opinion? You let Joe give his opinion, then you give a retort to it or a response or whatever. Then you say, what's your opinion? What's your opinion? And after all 3 people have given their opinions and you've given yours, we go to the next thing. That way James doesn't take over the whole hangout and Joe doesn't sit there completely silent and you and I don't interrupt each other. And I mean, that's why structure works. That's my suggestion.
No, I completely agree with you on many things. I think that our slight disagreements made sort of sour the waters, and that's unfortunate because you seem like I've met you before. Anyway, Joe, you wanted to jump in. What do you think?
I think
like James.
I am not a dualist. I'm ignorant of actually. I don't think I'm qualified to tag it with a high degree of certainty. But I do know the full range of the mind-body problem, as I understand it. Wavers or the spectrum includes dualism, materialism, and then idealism. And as I understand dualism, the mind and the body are separate things, or whatever you want to call it, the soul or whatever. There's a dualistic aspect where there's something beyond the physical that's going on. Materialism posits that it's all related to physics and matter and or energy, which are E equals m. If you take out the squared, the 2 of those are the same. So some residing in the nature of what is physical, including energy, and then idealism posits that the fact that it's all consciousness, that we're actually conjuring up the physical world based on some sort of a water level that's set by the collective belief, perhaps, of all living organisms, and perhaps the whole cosmos is alive by that axiom. So I was just thinking, you guys are talking about the first 2, dualism and materialism, but in order to have a discussion, which was ostensibly what this was supposed to be about, we would have to cover the full spectrum of all 3. And again, I'm saying I don't really feel qualified to make a certain you know, position. But I think that it's an interesting discussion, and I think the very fact that you guys are going back and forth about it says that it's not easily answerable.
Very well spoken, Joe. It sounds like you're reading from a textbook almost. No, I mean, see, this is what I think. I think everyone, even it doesn't matter if you study it or not, you can always have an opinion and you can have a belief about it, and you could be right. I'm not 100% a materialist, because consciousness is very mysterious. It's like the pre-Big Bang stuff. It's going to be one of those problems that we just may never get round to solving. We're maybe too stupid. Our brains are too stupid to figure out our brains, sort of thing.
Yeah, Christoph Koch, who is heads up the Allen Institute, is doing the connectome, the brain mapping thing up at the Allen Institute, said something really interesting, and I forget what it was on, Radio Lab or something, one of these podcast things, but he said, you know, we assume that, that, like, for instance, the forces of nature are ubiquitous. They're all over the cosmos, that gravity works anywhere you go, and yet we have sort of pigeonholed consciousness into our biological frame, and that may be an unfair thing. He said that, and he just said offhandedly, which struck me as a really good question. He said that, you know, consciousness itself may be ubiquitous. It may be just like one of the forces of nature, all over the place. And so I thought that was a really good question. I don't have an answer, but it's a really good question.
So, Joe, you're saying that consciousness could be like an ether and it's spread out all through the cosmos. That's actually kind of popular. And it's sort of a new age sort of idea, because the thing that made me not a dualist, because dualism is what we naturally are inclined to believe because it feels correct intuitively, but what led me to disregard it is that every single time we've learnt something new about how the brain works, like such as we thought it was electrical impulses, yeah, it is. So that's not, there's no need for a ghost in the machine for that part. Then it's chemistry as well, neurotransmitters, and then it's proteins and enzymes, and we don't know what happens next really. But we haven't found a ghost in the machine yet, and we're getting pretty close to understanding how a whole cell works. We actually do understand how a cell works, more or less.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
No. I'm sure it's okay.
I'd love it, man.
When you say the ghost in the machine, the one problem with that scenario is if you define what it is you're looking for in such a way that you're not going to find what actually is there, you'll never find it. Because if you defined it in a way where you can physically... Problem is, you're looking for something that is not physical, that is metaphysical.
See, how would you detect it if it actually... if yours and other people who believe what you do, if you're right, there is actually a big problem. It's like the multiverse. How did you even detect the thing? I can't even think of an experiment that would do it.
I was gonna tell you. I was gonna tell you.
You got an idea?
No, I was gonna tell you in my answer.
Go for it.
So if you can, just like we waited for Joe to stop talking.
Okay, you don't have to beat the drum, James. Just go on, man.
Unless it keeps happening.
Are you done?
I guess so.
I think James has the floor, but no, Joe, go.
Yeah, I guess I'm done because I don't think I'm ever going to get my...
Okay, great. So if now, Brady, if you are saying that materialism is true, and here again, I am just bringing questions, not really assertions of any sort. So I don't have a dog in the hunt necessarily, but I do have a tendency to think that the evidence related to materialism is not only fascinating but very, very convincing. But the interesting part that I come at as a result of positing that that there is no ghost in the machine is that then you must make the assertion that matter is conscious, because that's what we are made of. Or, you know, if you include that the fact that matter is energy and they're transferable or whatever. So whatever this thing is that relates in terms of physics is conscious. And that that presents something very fascinating from my
It's
perspective.
profound, isn't it? It's I like the Carl Sagan quote: "We're a way for the cosmos to see itself, know itself, but we're also a way for ourselves to know ourselves." We're the only species that's sentient of being sentient. Can you just reframe your
So
question?
where you
Because
mean?
I was closing down some windows that kept beeping. Joe?
Oh, I really didn't have a question. I was saying that if there is no ghost in the machine, that means that matter and or energy, whatever, is the thing that is conscious. And so that meant
Absolutely.
that
That's what
then
I
means,
believe.
yeah, that, and like you had done the Carl Sagan quote, yeah, that is a fascinating prospect, and it could then open up whole new worlds. Like, for instance, I would think that if you start looking at reality as if it's communicative, since we're little chunks of it, uh, then you could start picking up some semiotic messages. Like, for instance, the way our biology is physically arranged one to another, there is sort of an underlying ethos where your heart has to do something nourishing in the value in the context of the community it lives in, as do all the other organs and so forth. So there could be statements being made by the cosmos in ways that transcend our notions of linguistics, at least our current ones, if matter is conscious.
Yeah, well, it's looking. Well, we know. Well, as far as I'm concerned, we do know that matter is conscious because our brains are evidence of that. But it appears there's been some interesting philosophical arguments that with like computer intelligence and alien intelligence, and how would it be different? Would it be based on the same sort of chemistry as ours? I highly doubt it, because you do not need serotonin to do a lot of the consciousness heavy lifting. You can use, because we know if you give someone, say, the active ingredient in mushrooms or LSD, these have serotonin embedded in them. If you give them that, the protein behaves really differently, and so consciousness can be controlled by many different hundreds and millions, hundreds of millions of different molecules could probably moderate consciousness. But
Do
it's
you
still the
don't
molecule
you
doing
mix
the
up
work.
don't you mix up consciousness with state of mind? Or isn't there a difference between those two?
Well, no, your state of mind is your consciousness the state of mind is just at a one particular time. Consciousness
Hmm.
is that thing that you feel like you're riding behind your eyes in the back of your head, like you feel like you're driving your sort of your own little self-ambulatory
What you are
person.
not if you're asleep,
Me,
for example.
well, you get to do the driving, but you don't choose where you go, basically, because like James and I think we don't have free will, so it's all sort of just playing out. But that doesn't mean, but because free will isn't, it's very convincing. Like consciousness is so convincing, that's why people just go towards dualism. I think it's a still respectable idea, and we can't rule it out at this time simply because consciousness is too damn complicated. It really is. It's like Genesis will be figured out before then. We'll probably figure out how the universe began before we figure out consciousness, which is kind of shocking. It's sort of a final frontier.
You watch too much Star Trek.
Well, you've got 100 billion brain cells, and each cell has about 1 to 10,000 connections between it and other cells. So that's 100 trillion, 200 trillion synapses. That's a lot. That is a hell
That
of a
are
lot.
that are biologically, chemically determined for you, and so whatever goes on in your brain is not what's going on in my brain. So I don't know why people waste their time sharing what's going on in their brain with another brain. If there's not a such thing as reality or objective reality outside of the brain, outside of the mind, objective things that are true, objective reality, Why do we have these discussions? Because if everything is biologically predetermined, what you feel, think, and all that stuff, then really your opinions aren't your opinions. They're just
James,
your.
I'm sorry, I can answer your
Actually, our
question.
brain,
I
brain
like it.
chemistry is pretty well balanced because if it was slightly different, we would all be out of our minds, I think. A
Yeah,
little bit
Dr.
of
Evil saying brain
dopamine
chemistry is
or
well balanced.
too much and you go AWOL.
No, I agree with him, but see, he has to borrow from my worldview in order to say that.
What do you mean?
I don't like speaking in terms of worldviews because, I mean, I think we can either show something that is true, or we can just say that we don't know yet, and we can have probabilities and we can have discussions about it. But to hold anything as certain is just setting yourself up for a future letdown, possibly.
Are you certain about that? Are you certain about that?
Absolutely. The only thing I'm certain of is doubt.
I thought you just said we can't hold anything as certain, but you're certain about that.
No, all right. So this is sort of what I more or less think. There is the objective truths out there, okay? But because we're subjects and we have these really terrible brains that they don't actually make a very accurate model of reality. They make mistakes all the time. They're terrible at what they're supposed to be doing, but they get by. They function. But yeah, but then it's yeah. Well,
Brady, I had the same conversation with Christopher Mowdy, if you know him. I don't know if you know him. He studies psychology.
Do I want to know him? Oh, cool. I want to know him.
You probably do. Here's where I think you and him are similar. When someone talks about objective reality or truth and things like that, they're not saying that knowledge. When they say absolute knowledge, this is what they don't mean. Okay, and this is what the naturalist and the atheist thinks they mean. Absolute knowledge doesn't mean to know everything about something. It means to have certain knowledge about something, but not total knowledge. You can certainly know some things, even though you may not know all things about something. So when I say absolute knowledge, what I mean is something that objectively, when I talk about absolute truth, I'm talking about something that objectively exists outside of you. That's objectively true, universally true. And we can get into different aspects of that. So it doesn't mean you know everything. Nobody here, no person with, who's honest will say,
yeah. Or who's not arrogant.
I know everything about everything. No one will ever say that because.
Yeah. Well, you'd be surprised. People do say that all the time.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, right. People get confused and they don't. I prefer to use the word confidence instead of belief because it's just a better word, I think.
But you just a second ago talked about certainty and now how you couldn't have certainty. And then when I asked you,
it's probabilities, in my opinion.
And then when
that's the way to approach it. Sorry, go on.
Then when I asked you, are you certain about that? You said yes. So it's a self-refuting.
Yeah, well, humans make mistakes. Like I said, our brains are pretty crappy at doing what they do.
What it is we become lazy in our thinking. We tell people you can't know anything, but for some reason we know that. You don't believe in anything you hear, but yet we tell them don't believe in everything you hear, so they have to hear that, right? So we use a lot of these mantras or sayings, but they're logically and rationally inconsistent. They're self-refuting statements, self-refuting beliefs. When you say, I do not believe in any truth, which you haven't, I'm just using this as an example, I do not believe in any truth, you just refuted yourself because you believe that to be true.
I see what you mean, but yeah, that's just an interesting note. Yeah, I mean, this is why the brain is so interesting because everyone's a little bit narcissistic and they do like themselves. And if you're anything, you're your consciousness. Your body is not really that important. It's more of it's a support system for your brain, really.
Sure.
I think the mind is a rendering organ. In other words, it renders what's useful. The Addison illusions, where the squares on the board are actually different color or the same color, but we perceive them as different colors based on the context and
like
and
a
all
computer, Joe.
Pardon me?
Like a computer, Joe? You said rendering.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay. So I'm just saying that our brain renders what it thinks is useful given the situation. So it will render colors lighter or darker to make them appear shadowy, so that we can navigate it in a way that the brain thinks is better. And I think that far more than an organ that produces an accurate picture, the brain produces what it thinks is a useful one. And far more than logical, human beings are social. So I think the most important thing to do is to treat each other well, because our brains
You've
really
answered James's question, Joe. Why do we have conversations like this? That was your question, right, James? More or less.
Well, yeah.
Well, the reason is because we're social primates, and that's what social primates do. We're curious. We want to know other people's opinions. We don't want to be in our own little world, locked away. We want to have other people's. We know that other people can empathize and put ourselves in people's shoes.
Why?
Why? Because it's been. Oh, maybe it was evolutionary benefit to have that. Oh, I mean.
But then it really all doesn't mean anything, right? Because if we're going to hold to our
Well, it depends what you said, how you set the bar for meaning. If you
believe, guys, when you kind of laugh or make comments about what I'm saying, I don't hold this position. I'm throwing the position back at itself. I don't hold this position.
Yeah,
to me,
James, if I laugh at your position, I deprecate myself. It's Dr. Evil probably confirm as much as I deprecate and offend anyone else. So I do not intend to offend you in any way, James. Or your beliefs. I respect your beliefs.
I just want
where I'll defend them.
Okay.
Just so you can hold them.
Sure. The guy that spoke a second ago, Joe, he said something. He says the brain produces, and that's what I want to focus on for a second. What something produces is something other than the thing that produces it. And so when the brain has we talked about this earlier, the brain has certain phenomenon that goes on that helps create thoughts and memories and things like that. We agreed on that.
Yeah.
But thoughts and memories themselves are not the brain, and they're not physical. There's something the brain produces. And so therefore there is the metaphysical, because things that are not physical, the thought is not the brain.
That's a clever argument, but I can see maybe something wrong with it. You can help maybe see if I can see if it's right or not. I just say what you said again really fast, because I'm pretty sure that you understand what I'm going to say.
Well, I'm trying to word it the way that a naturalist person or a non-theist person would word it. I would word it differently, but the idea that the brain produces something, okay? Well, whatever the brain produces, whatever it produces is not the brain. It's something the brain produced. So
that's true, James. But the brain also stores thoughts in the brain. You have a parts of your brain for actually storing memory.
Sure.
And thoughts. So they're actually physically stored in the brain, like a computer would store things on its hard drive. And I like the computer analogy a lot. I just wish we were 50 years in the future so I could actually show you an intelligent computer.
Except for as a naturalist, you couldn't explain computers existing naturalistically. They didn't just come about through evolution.
No, we created them.
Yeah, kind of interesting.
That doesn't violate any laws that I'm aware of.
No, I'm just saying it's interesting that the computer does what it does because it's designed by a sentient thinking being, and so we know that, and that the computer itself doesn't do anything of itself, unless it's programmed by a outside sentient being. So first off, we have a categorical fallacy. We have a computer doesn't line up with it. It's not an equal comparison to a human being, even though there are similarities such as information being stored. It doesn't belong in the same category. Well, so we have to find something that belongs in the same category. So find me another species or something that belongs in the same.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, there's only about 7 species that have theory of mind. Theory of mind is being able to see yourself in the mirror and recognize it's you. Like they'll put paint on the face or the beak, and the animal will either brush it off or not. And it shows that Yeah. So dolphins, cetaceans, whales, magpies do it for some reason. Dogs don't do it, interestingly, and also the apes and monkeys, and obviously us. And octopi do it as well, which is fucking weird because they're so far down the evolutionary tree from us, like 600 million years. We shared a common ancestor. This means that intelligence evolved at least independently a couple times, at least.
Well, you and I will have a separate conversation, hopefully in the future,
Oh yeah,
about
man.
your assumptions about the
No, but all that
6 million years and all that stuff. We'll talk about it later. But
600 million, I think, is the quoted time
yeah,
we'd split from the Nautilus.
yeah. Well, and we can have our discussions about the
Why don't you
overwhelming.
believe that?
Well, we can have our discussions about the overwhelming lack of evidence that any of that stuff
Yeah.
happened.
But all these other creatures that can see themselves in the mirror, can't do what humans do. And the distinction is that they don't know that they know it's them, but they don't know. They can't think of themselves thinking about themselves.
It's like a dog.
They can put them in the place of
There's an
someone
extra
else.
layer of depth.
Actually, the thing they tested can they think that the person on the other side is actually someone else seeing through someone else's eyes.
And
it's
that's
actually really hard to test for consciousness. Like, I can't prove that Dr. Evil and James and Joe are conscious. You could be just figments of my imagination. You could be simulations.
And this is where we end up when we try to escape the quote-unquote God problem. We end up in the land of absurdity. We believe absurd things to try to explain reality because we want to avoid.
Well, God is a good explanation if you can prove that there is a God, and you obviously have found your own proof, so that's cool. But for me, the evidence is lacking. So I've found that materialism explains the universe. Is the best model that we have to. Because it has predictive power.
But the point I'm making is that when you say something like, "Oh, we could just be figments of your imagination and stuff," one difference between you and I, and I'm not talking about the whole of what people call Christianity or any other individual, but the difference between you and I is, I live my worldview. You don't, because when you talk to somebody in your family or anything like that, you've talked to them. There's not even a second of doubt in your mind that they exist, that you talk to them, when you see them, when you go out to eat with them or anything like that.
Sure.
It's when you put on your philosophical hat that you get into all these. Maybe they're an illusion.
Well, there's a philosophical argument that uses probability to make it more likely that we actually do live in a simulation than in the real world.
Yeah, because you watch the.
Do you want to hear the argument? It's from a professor of philosophy at Cambridge, Nick Bostrom. He said, okay, so if you assume that computers will be able to, once we've got quantum computers and all the rest, just go with the flow. Once we've got that up and running, these computers will be able to create simulations that are so real they will actually appear like a Sims game, but like a cosmic scale Sims game, right? And just because these computers can make millions and billions of copies, we're more likely to be in one of these simulations than in an actual physical cosmos that had a big bang and all this. I don't actually believe that argument, but you can see that how it's almost using sophistry, like clever but unsound reasoning to.
But you don't live your life like that. And going back to something I said a minute ago.
But it could very well be true.
It's amazing how people run from what they feel is the mythology or the fantasy of Scripture, but yet they run to the movies and video games and stuff to try to explain all this other stuff. You're going into the Keanu Reeves movies and things like that to try to explain reality and you're saying, bear with me for a minute. What if? And these things sound like the term. Sounds like the.
In all fairness, the reverse of that is true. Those movies were written based on things that were already posited. It wasn't. I mean, yeah, it may have infiltrated into popular culture by that vector, but that wasn't the origin of thought.
Yeah, and to be fair, the things that were written in Scripture were already there. They were just documented also. But see, you'll just automatically dismiss
And,
that.
a lot of
No,
people
I
use
don't dismiss
copies there.
scripture. I think it's well worth reading it. I think everyone should read the Bible or Quran or whatever religious text I think they should read them all. Not the Book of Mormon, though. That one's just ridiculous.
The point I'm making is when you talk about let's do the hypothetical. Let's think about it for a minute about computers becoming self-aware and stuff. You're talking Terminator and stuff. You're not talking reality.
No, no, no. I'm talking like a computer that can well, our brain can still do things computers can't. It has a few tricks up its sleeve that we can't replicate on computers. Computers can calculate huge sums really fast, and they use a lot of energy. Our brains run on like a couple of light bulbs of energy. I think it's like 20 amps or something. It's really small, and it can do so much. It makes a simulation of reality that's as good as anything in robotics or whatever. It's amazing. And it's the complexity. I think that people are just so stunned that they are conscious in the big, wide cosmos that has so much mystery. We understand hardly any of it, really. We understand like less than 4% of it, isn't it? Because it's all dark energy and dark matter, right? So we understand about 4%, and that's not including consciousness, which is the biggest issue if of that 4%.
But yeah, we know it's all physical.
But you do believe that the brain is a physical chemical process?
Okay, it's a different thing than what
If you do believe that, then you're saying that the mind exists, but you're not telling me exactly where I can look for it.
Well, that's the problem. It's a little bit, and this is our first time talking together. We'll grow together in our conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
But
learn together. That's what I like.
It's a little bit jumbled because we're going from one thing to the next thing, back to the brain, back to color, back over here. So it's a
ping pong without the net.
Yeah, it's a little bit jumbled. But what I'm trying to say to you is, like a few minutes, to answer that, I'll try to answer that. A few minutes ago or 15 minutes ago, whatever, I talked about when you talked about the ghost in the machine. The problem is, and everyone does this, whether at some point in their life, whether they're a theist or a non-theist or whatever they want to call themselves, if you define something in such a way that you will never find what it is you're looking for because of how you defined it, then it's a self-defeating thing. You're not ever going to find the ghost in the machine because you defined out of the equation all possible other scenarios except for the one that you have determined as the thing that I will find. But yet you set it up in such a way that you'll never find it because you've defined something that doesn't exist. And so you have to be careful not to do that.
Yeah, you do.
Isn't the reverse of that true? In other words, just because by virtue of the fact that you have posited something that cannot be measured does not make it real, the same way it doesn't make it unreal. It's just unproven.
Yeah, unlike probably most theists you've ran into, because the majority of religion in this world is crap, including Christianity. I don't believe in something to fill a gap or to fill a void of something that doesn't make sense. I don't plug God into the gaps.
It sounds like you've thought about it.
Oh, absolutely. Christianity, true biblical Christianity, is a thinking man's religion. It's not somebody who just. It's not snake handlers and people.
Tradition is based on a lot. It's based on questioning things, isn't it?
Well, the same religion, if you want to call it that, because it wasn't necessarily organized completely, but the same.
I know what you mean.
The same faith that Adam and Eve had, the same God that they worshipped in the Garden of Eden, if that all occurred, is the same God that I worship and the same faith that I have. It's just developed over time into what is either called, at one time it was called the Way, and then it was called Christian, or whatever. It's different labels. When people say there's all these other religions that are older than Christianity, I'm like, bull. Because
you might like this idea, James. Think of because you believe in God, so think of God as consciousness, right? Just he's spilling out everywhere through the cosmos and beyond, perhaps, and inside of you and out of you. So you're not separate from this consciousness. You're like a antenna for consciousness. Okay, so you don't actually produce consciousness. Your brain does controls your body, but consciousness is sort of like received like a radio signal from God or something. What do you think of that idea? That sounds pretty cool.
Sure. And I think
It's
Star Wars is a good
exotic.
idea. The Wizard of Oz is a good idea, and I think lots of things that we just
No, but I think it's one of the more reasonable explanations of the God consciousness connection I've heard, because they're both.
Sure, because you stared at your belly, and you came up with it. You
because you believe in God. We know consciousness. If we assume consciousness is a dualistic thing, then it doesn't have to be produced by the brain. It can be received like an antenna receives information.
But we can
it could be, but it's more likely both if that's the case, I'd say, because we know for a fact that the brain does make some part of consciousness.
Okay. But see, here's the thing. Again, we're going to have to learn each other. When you speak, you say a lot of interesting things, but you go all over the place and you cover things we already covered. You say things in your refutation or your response to me that I've already told you I concur with, and you mix them in with things that I don't concur with, and you kind of try to make them sound the same. I'm not saying that's your motivation. I'm saying that's just what's happening. I already told you I believe that the brain is a physical thing, and that it produces electrical currents and things. You have neurons in your brain.
Yes, what do you think of the antenna idea? I mean, you didn't like it, I guess.
Well, I don't waste my time. I don't waste my time with just making up something and saying, "Wouldn't that be cool?" I like to talk about reality.
Everyone does, though. Everyone does.
Sure, that's what movies and books
and it's not really wasting time. I think reading fiction, for example, can tell you about real life.
Okay, but look, now what you're doing is you're using what I'm saying as a springboard into something else.
Please don't take what I say as personal, whatever, because I don't do that.
Here, let me say something, okay? You're enthusiastic like I am, but it's just very, very hard to get a complete thought out.
I don't have a scary dog avatar, though, so I'm less intimidating.
I know it sounds like I talk a lot, but that's because I'm trying to get in there.
You talk as much as me.
Yeah, and never
complete
thoughts. Never incomplete thoughts. I don't. That's my.
You're making complete sense so far to me. I'm gonna not the whole God thing. I don't mind if you believe in God. I think it's great. I think there's many benefits to it.
I'm telling you for your own good, and also just for my own nerves, because I don't like to repeat. I don't like listening. No, my own voice. I don't like saying things 6 times. It annoys me. It hurts my head. Okay,
Well, don't accuse me of saying that I believe that free will doesn't exist 3 times. Because that'll just hurt your throat.
I don't know if you have ADHD or not, but you don't seem to be able to sit still for more than like 4 seconds or 5 seconds. It's like when talking to you, like I get 4 words into what I'm saying, and you have something to say about it. I don't know if maybe you do have ADD. I'm not mocking you. I'm just saying maybe that is.
No.
I mean, I need to know because it's.
I actually don't.
I've been on here.
I would like to talk about the mind-body problem and not
Sure, Joe. What do you got, Joe?
Now I'm not talking, so just let me finish. I would really like to stop listening to you lecture on how things should go, all for his whatever. I want to talk about the mind-body problem. Can we get back to that? And thank you. Okay, so anyway. I know you guys talked about dualism and also physicalism, and I think I agree with you, Brady, that physicalism is probably the best axiom we have to navigate with, because if not, then you're just positing something that isn't necessarily provable in any way, shape, or form, and then you have to navigate with it. So I could posit that gravity isn't real. But I think that if I jumped off a building, the gravity of the situation would assert itself upon the splat. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't take that bet.
No, I wouldn't either. So, and I think that you're bringing up. You probably have a host of real-world, peer-reviewed papers on which to found your posited worldview, and I think that's what you're saying too, isn't it?
Yes. I could explain how a cell works. And how consciousness is probably formed in the brain.
Yeah, this is provisional.
But you don't need to know that. You just have to know the very simplistic basics, and then you just multiply one cell by 100 billion, and you got it.
Right, and I also think you know something else really important about the perspective that you're bringing to the table is that it is predictive. It is the only thing that where we can stick our oar in the water and actually produce an intentional outcome.
Right.
As
And there's
opposed,
another thing it has in its core as well, Joe. It's also got philosophical precedent, because every time we find something new about the brain, it's not ghost in the machine or God. It's or consciousness is not in the brain. It's another materialistic process, mechanical sort of thing going on. It's always that.
well, there may be a ghost in the machine, but the ghost is the entire cosmos. It would appear. I mean, because like I said, even if you take a materialistic perspective, and maybe look, my position is provisional too. I don't know everything, but
Great.
if you posit that consciousness, or this thing we perceive of as consciousness, resides on a wave of energy, you know, in one form or another, whether it's frozen energy in the form of matter or etherical in the form of, you know, magnetic and etc. forces, that ultimately then what you were saying is that physical things are conscious. And so to what degree that happens throughout the cosmos, we can't certainly say, but I do see patterns, you know, representative patterns in the cosmos that would tell me that there is some kind of, you know, like we have the capacity for insight, and so it would surprise me if that wasn't true on other levels, just based on the small little portion of the spectrum that I can see within the realm of biology.
Yeah, wow, that was
I
great.
disagree. Which was one thing you said that material objects are conscious. No, I think they can produce consciousness, but are not necessarily conscious themselves.
Consciousness is probably a result of it's all consciousness is, in my opinion, is just really complex carbon chemistry. Really complicated chemistry, and it's highly networked and interconnected, and so it's very hard to map, and it's hard to measure, and this is why people are dualists, because it's easier just to say, oh yeah, give up on the problem, let's not solve it. But if you do solve it, it's every time we find a new and the next piece of the onion layer, right, of how the brain works or makes consciousness, we find it's naturalistic. No textbooks for the last 100 years have said that Descartes was right. Dualism's true.
Well, okay, so that is interesting, but okay. So forget about human capacity for abstractions. Okay, let's not get lost in our world or in our words for just a second here, if we could. The jewel wasp is a solitary creature. It chases down and it actually chases down and edits the neurophysiology of cockroaches, then digs a nest and walks that edited version of a cockroach into the nest, lays its eggs, which then know how to chew their way into the abdomen and strategically draw nourishment from the blood, at the same time then strategically eat the organs in the right order to keep that cockroach nursery womb-esque thing alive until it then bursts forth as another jewel wasp. If we took
Joey, that is all kinds of fucked up, man.
It is, but it is true. That does happen. That's what jewel wasps do. And if we were to take a human being that did that into a court of law, the question of intention, you know, and so all I'm trying to say is that this notion that we make that consciousness, the pinnacle of consciousness, resides in human semiotic linguistics it may be false. You know, that's sort of an assertion we run with by virtue of the fact of the limits of our own capacity.
Yeah, well, we're definitely inclined to want to believe we're the best species around, but and also the most intelligent, but I think we are the most intelligent. We're probably not the most effective at surviving. That probably goes to bacteria or viruses.
All babies think they're the most intelligent.
But by having a brain, you can but the brain evolved over, like, it basically layer caked. So it started with the reptilian brain, which is like where your back of your head is, and then it builds new layers on top. And the newest layer that we have, we're the only ones with it, is the prefrontal cortex, which is where all this serotonin consciousness action happens. Largely, almost all, like a huge percentage of it happens there. If we didn't have that, not ape chimpanzees, closest cousins, they don't have that. They're missing this part of the brain, and
Well,
so
yeah.
they're not conscious to our degree.
Well, now that is where what you're positing for me breaks down a little bit. Now, I do agree that it is a unique form of consciousness and an amazing one, but electroception, I think that's what it's called in sharks, is amazing too. The way that bats communicate with, and so all I'm saying is that there are lots of different forms.
Can I just stop you on the bat thing? Because I heard Richard Dawkins thinks that bats see in color.
Well, that may be true. All I'm saying is that there are different forms of perception.
And there's another question lingering too. Where do we draw the line at consciousness? Where does it stop? An ant, a bee, a dog, a lizard, an ape? Are we really as conscious as we think we are? I think computers will become more conscious than us one day, and they'll surpass us. But because we program the computers, and they'll do our bidding, they won't turn against us. I hope.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
What do you think about artificial intelligence?
Well, I don't think there is anything but intelligence in one form or another. So, the fact that it transforms hither and yon.
Oh, sorry, consciousness then. Consciousness.
Yeah.
Or sentience.
Yeah,
that's better.
Yeah, that's a really excellent proposition. If you take a physicalist view that certain arrangements of cosmos can generate some sort of ascension, some sort of a self-awareness thing, then perhaps it is also true that it could be crafted by what we call artificial means. But I don't, human beings don't do anything supernatural. We don't do anything outside the natural world.
Yeah, it's a misnomer to say artificial intelligence, isn't it?
Yeah. It kind of is, because we're part of.
It's real intelligence. It's just as real as carbon chemistry intelligence, silicon intelligence. It's just as will be just as good.
But ultimately, though, the cosmos does communicate something else. At least a significant portion of it. Carbon is hungry for a relationship, as is oxygen, as is all the things that we call biological. Are hungry for a relationship, and so any machine that I think came out of our hands would also be hungry for a relationship. So ultimately, I think that we'd be able to hang around and talk back to each other. So.
That's an optimistic outlook, which I also share. And I'm not studying the Ukraine
tonight. So, yeah.
Where are you from, Joe?
I'm from the U.S. From yeah.
Most people I meet are from the US, which is cool. It's like it's highly skewed. Like I'd say half of the people I meet are from the US at least.
Right.
Dr. Evil's from Belgium.
Oh, yeah.
That's where his secret lair is.
Right. I do like it.
Yeah, so I think thanks for joining the thing. It's been going for an hour and a half, actually. Yes. Yeah. So do you have any questions? And because I can try and we'll just have a little back and forth if you want.
I don't have as much of a question as I do a.
I have some for you if you don't.
No problem at all. I'd be happy if you ask me questions. But I do have a sort of an overall observation about the landscape. I think that other than the fact that something exists, everything else is provisional, and so. From my perspective, and you said it too, as a psychologist, we are social creatures. I think the most important thing for us to do is to cultivate, to have an interest in each other's success, because that's what makes the solid bonds. That's what makes, a wealth of experience, if you will, a better place to be. And so I think that's the most important thing we can do. that all of these conversations that we have about these things that we can't really nail down with any kind of degree of certainty that washes away all doubt is if we get argumentative about it, I think we're diminishing ourselves. To me, it's the same as an autoimmune disease. We're attacking ourselves. So anyway, that's my point.
Yeah, no, yeah, I like you, Joe. You should see the messages that all for his glory alone is sending me.
Okay.
Man, okay, he takes things so personally. I mean,
listen, he's sincere in his position. My guess is that's where his that's the thing that forms his social glue. That's the thing that forms his in-group. And so you and I are on his out-group.
I think it's this in-group, out-group thing. And we're naturally born xenophobic, so we don't want to leave our in-group and change our whole view of the world.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's a lot to do. And then we also have to admit that we were wrong about that stuff, and humans don't like that. Then we like to be right. And
I'm happy with not knowing. I don't know. I found a peace in not knowing. You know, because
but that doesn't come naturally, Joe. That you have to learn skepticism and how to, and this way of thinking that you seem to have. I mean, all for James has it as well, but he doesn't apply it to everything. He applies it to everything except God and consciousness, apparently, or that from what I deduced from our discussion.
Right. Well, I don't know how that works. My guess is that, like you said earlier, there's a reptilian and then a limbic system and then our cognitive function. Yeah. Well, that triune brain faculty, like as soon as your emotion gets raised, our logic and reason just floats right away. It's not attached very hardcore just yet. Maybe it'll become more permanently grounded as we go forward in the future, if we do. But be that as it may, I do think that if Grandma and Grandpa said this, or if we were going through a hard time in our life and we found Jesus, or whatever the case may be, that we form emotional bonds and then we conflate the ideas, the ideology. You know, we conflate the map with the journey. You know, we see that,
and we compartmentalize it and we rationalize it, and then and we're so good at it that this is what I'm trying to say with the brain is it's a faulty mechanism. It works well enough to get you through, but you have to doubt yourself sometimes. Don't always trust your intuition, because we know from science that our common intuition is wrong. I mean,
well, that's true. What you said about having to do it may not be true, because a person that has a realistic assessment of themselves and they're pretty much a jerk might not have as good a time in life as if they're going through deluded thinking they're carrying some sword of truth and blah blah blah. So, you know, I don't. In other words, I'm more akin to, I think morality, as we colloquially use it, is an illusion, but that constructive and destructive in relation.
Well, it's objective morality is an illusion, but relative morality certainly exists.
Yeah, I would say that you can be constructive or destructive, and so that in that case, that's our closest we can get to any kind of.
Or you could be interested in apathy.
Yeah, I used to be apathetic, but I don't care for it.
But I think that's an oxymoron, because you can't be interested in not being interested.
I believe I was ironic. I'm a solipsist too, but I think more people should try it.
Well, the thing about solipsism is there's no way that I can prove. This is the problem when computers become intelligent, because there's already the argument that we've had for ages now that you can't prove that another human is conscious. I think you can do that now with sort of fMRIs and things to a high degree of certainty. But when a computer gets conscious, it'll be a different kind of consciousness, and it could just. Have you heard of the Turing test?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Alan Turing, who made like the first computer, cracked Enigma. He said that if you get a human and you put a wall in between him and the computer, and if he can't tell that, or she can't tell that they're talking to a computer, they've passed the Turing test. So that's a test of intelligence, or because if you feel like you're talking to another human, then but it's really a computer, then if you can't tell the difference, Turing thought that's proof enough to say that AI is conscious.
Well, it's pragmatically conscious in relation to the person that's relating. So, and I think
But
that's
I like his idea, but Turing had a lot of criticism since then, and he did pose it in like 1950s. So, I mean, it's quite. It's. I mean, the mirror test is another good one, like I brought up before, and it's surprising they're creatures that actually can't see themselves in the mirror. So an octopus can, but a dog can't. I mean, a horse can't. An elephant, I'm not sure. I think elephants probably could. They got pretty big brains, because there's actually a direct correlation between intelligence and or level of consciousness, to be very loose with my terms, and the size of the brain in ratio to the size of the organism.
Yeah, I think that we have words, and sometimes we get lost in our own little words, that as soon as we put an abstract membrane on something. So if we have an anthropocentric view of what is conscious and what is not, and then we measure biomass of brain versus body and all of that, and look at the mirror test and all of that as axioms to determine whether or not something is intelligent. I think intelligence intelligence and awareness are perhaps two different things, or maybe I'm using the wrong word. Maybe, like,
I follow you meaning all the way, Joe.
Self-awareness are two different aspects. I think that once you get a brain and stuff, you start getting like self-aware of your local environment. But these little, like an oxygen atom, knows what to do no matter where it is in the cosmos. You know?
I like that, but so this is exactly right. An atom of hydrogen in the sun knows exactly what to do, but I use "know" in quote marks because it's just following the laws of physics, and then the laws of physics give you the laws of chemistry, which give you the laws of biology, and we're just a really complicated biological result.
Okay, now let me accept your axiom. Let me accept that,
sure.
and then feed it back to you. So, if by virtue of describing a process you have ruled out consciousness, then can't I just describe all the processes by which you operate and rule you out as alive?
Do you mean that you can just slowly take parts of the brain out and lose subject?
No. I'm saying, okay, Brady went to the store. It was predicated on neurosynaptic processes and dopaminergic urges and so forth, and synaptic and dendrites and all of this stuff. Okay, so I describe all of the processes all the way down to the atomic level. Just describe those processes. Haven't I then sufficiently ruled out any awareness in you? Isn't that what you're doing to the atom?
I see we're going. Okay, the difference between an atom doesn't have any influence on consciousness because an atom's too small. So the things that influence consciousness are actually electrons influence consciousness because electrical signals release the molecules, but the molecules do just send the electrical signal just releases the molecules. The molecules don't even do much. They just hit the receptors. It's the protein that we found that does all the really important stuff, like how creativity and all the things that humans think are special or unique, novel to them.
Right, but I'm saying under the big umbrella, you are describing a process. Right.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, we're all guided by the laws of physics, and consciousness should be no exception.
Okay. And so what you're saying is that physics is conscious.
Well, some people have. There's a new age belief where the cosmos is conscious, the whole cosmos. It's not God, but it's actually an alive, and it's like the Earth is an alive thing. Because who are we to say that the Earth isn't an organism? Because
it certainly does does seem to appear that the biological organisms that inhabit Earth have, over the years, violated, but then tried to bring itself back into homeostasis. That was the first extinction was because biology almost drowned in its own shit. That it produced, the cyanobacteria and all of that produced enough oxygen to almost kill itself, called snowball Earth, and then developed a reciprocal relationship with another biological life form that pretty much was the first dung beetle, and we're just extensions of that.
Yeah, and for 3 billion years it was just bacteria, and if that didn't happen, there wouldn't be any oxygen for us to breathe. There wouldn't be any multicellular life, because oxygen is like the fuel for if you have more than one cell, you need lots of it. And the brain uses like a third of your glucose and probably a third of your oxygen up. And you got to realize how big your brain is compared to your body. It looks ridiculous when you compare it to other animals, ratio-wise. Dolphins and us have the biggest brain-to-body ratio.
Right. Although they have more glial mass than we do. They don't have as many neurological. Although, I don't know if you've read R. Douglas Field's The Other Brain, but there is some fascinating things going on with glial cells that I think that neuroscience has just not.
Well, they speed up electrical signals, don't they? They're like think of a copper wire, and when you wrap it in insulating tape or something, the signal can go. It doesn't lose its potency as much. That's what the brain does. These glial cells around them. But we want to investigate them because we don't know exactly what they do. It might do more. This is the problem. There's so many, like that's just the tip of the iceberg of what we don't know.
Right. You're talking about a particular type of glial cells called myelinating glial cells.
Yeah, how do you know this?
There are different kinds of glial cells. In fact, I think that the ratio is 85-15. That only 15% of the brain cells that you have are neuronal. I don't remember the exact percentage, so don't quote me on that. But
yeah, well,
there is way more.
I mean, 90% of your neurons, all they do is either excite the central nervous system or depress the homeostasis, as you said. That's all. That's 90% of them. That's what they do. They either excite or depress it. That's why when you drink alcohol, you mess with both of them, and that's why you get drunk, because you've depressed both of them, and you've inhibited the one that makes you alert, and you've accelerated the one that makes you depressed. So you've had a double sedative punch with alcohol. That's why you get drunk, actually.
Yeah, I like.
But that's 90%. But they don't really do anything important. You could remove them, or you could remove like 1% of your serotonin network, and that would be both just as detrimental to consciousness, I think.
Well, okay, so you're making it. I don't know whether what you just said is true or not.
Right. I'm saying that some you've got about 30 different neurotransmitters, okay, and it appears that only like a couple of them are really, really important for consciousness. The other ones just do the basic maintenance, day-to-day routine shopping stuff. Not shopping, but you know what I mean, right? They
take out the trash, and I know the.
They basically pass the message along, but they don't really, because they don't have these G proteins. They usually just, some of them are just electrical. There's no molecules at all, no neurotransmitters, for example. But and it's interesting when you look, because the serotonin was only discovered after we discovered LSD, which is really unbelievable, because people took LSD was discovered about 10 years earlier, and then we said, because consciousness was just a big black hole in 1950, okay? But then people started taking LSD, and they looked at the molecular structure, and serotonin is in there, it's embedded in the molecule, and then they put 2 and 2 together. They said, okay, this molecule, because we knew serotonin existed in like rat bellies, it's everywhere, but not in the brain. We didn't know how important it was for consciousness. And so they said LSD really, really affects consciousness. It affects everything about consciousness, your mood, what you're gonna, your sex drive, how happy you are, everything. It's clearly moderating serotonin in some way.
A
when they look in the brain and they find serotonin.
A lot of neurotransmitters do, including some that are transmitted up the vagus nerve through the gut brain. So, in other words, the communication from the gut to the brain is more prevalent than the communication of the brain to the gut, actually. So, those things, those colloquialisms like gut feeling are far more salient and true than
apt.
you think. So. Yeah, they are pretty apt. But I will say this: I would strongly recommend going forward that you do read R. Douglas Field or look him up and see some of the. He's been on a few podcasts, like the Brain Science podcast or whatever. So, but
sounds good
he has a
to me.
perspective on glial cells that may add to your lexicon of understanding there. I think.
Yeah, well, see, my main focus has been on the serotonergic system because. I mean, I'm placing my bet on that being I'll say that it's necessary for consciousness, but not sufficient. So you have to have the dopamine, you have to have the adrenaline, you have to have all the others. But if you don't have serotonin, especially you've got different subgroups of serotonin as well, it gets really complicated. You got dozens of different serotonin receptors. It's exactly the same molecule, but the receptors do sort of different things. They moderate different shit.
Yeah,
so
well, we have a tendency, we have a reductionist tradition, and I know reductionism gets trashed, perhaps more. I'm not saying reductionism is trash, but I'm saying that it can, like for instance, if you took a microscope to try to examine the cosmos, you're not going to see as much as this.
You're going to see less.
Right, and so the different lenses we apply to things can bring clarity, but they can also bring obscurity. So you have to apply the right lens to the right thing. I do think that serotonin, with the SSRIs that they use and obviously affect mood but the same way that collections of letters or sounds or whatever, the context that you pick up from the whole community of symbols, so to speak, works on the biological scale as well. It's linguistic like that. So you can't look at serotonin in isolation the same way you couldn't look at a lug nut and try to understand a traffic jam. So
yeah, or like a car engine, but only looking at one piston.
Right, vasopressin, oxytocin, and all of the glucophosphate, the norepinephrine, all of these things together, I think, have an interplay with each other. It's kind of like what causes the area of a rectangle. Well, you can't say which one is it, length or width. It is the whole community of things that actually creates that epiphenomenal event.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. You basically summed up consciousness. Consciousness is basically the complexity of all these things. It's because they have one cell is connected to up to 10,000 other dendrites, right? So 10,000 different signals are going out from one cell, and it's so hard. You can just imagine trying to map all that. You think mapping Google Maps took a long time? Whew, boy, this is nice. The Human Genome Project, nothing. This is why I focus only on really serotonin, because if I tried to learn about glial cells and all the other things that are in the brain and other parts of the brain and other than the frontal cortex, I wouldn't be able to get anywhere, because it's just there's too much abundance of stuff to learn. And also serotonin is actually very special. There's a study where they've given them psilocin, which is what is in magic mushrooms. It's literally the closest molecule you can get to serotonin without being serotonin. So basically you can hack into your serotonin network, and when you do this, neurons that haven't communicated for years, they suddenly start to reach out dendrites like magic towards each other, and it's the psilocin causing this to happen, because when the serotonin hits the receptor, it does the serotonin thing, but when psilocin hits it, this is completely serendipitous. It shouldn't be this way but it is. Your brain shouldn't read other molecules that aren't meant to be read by these receptors, but they can. And then they transform into different shapes, the proteins do. And when they transform into different shapes, that determines what the cell's going to do next. That's why psilocin rewires your brain, and this leads on to like how you can make humans smarter or get them to quit smoking or make them not depressed just by giving them a 4-hour psilocin. And this is backed up by empirical evidence. I can link you to it after if you want. It's been shown
you don't have to link me. I mean, you could put it in the base.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll give you the smoking example really fast. Okay, so the best chance you have if you're a smoker is a 10% success rate if you use all the treatments on offer. Okay, but if you do therapy and in the therapy it has to be cognitive behavioral, which is just thinking about your thoughts and behaviors. And then so you do that leading up to the trip. And then when you have the 4-hour trip, your brain rewires what you've rehearsed. And it happens in real time. If you had a microscope, you could see them growing towards each other. And this is completely abnormal. It shouldn't be doing this. So you could rewire your serotonin system to be like a super, super happy person, or because it moderates all these important things, you could be super happy, super sex drived, super hungry, super whatever. You can actually, but we have to map the brain before we start fiddling around too much.
Well, you
can see the potential I'm getting at.
I sure do, and like I said, I was trying to say you don't have to necessarily link me. Put it in the below in the link for the public, the people who are listening to this. I'm familiar with the research.
Better idea.
In fact, Gabor Mate, maybe you're familiar with him. He's a psychologist with a concentration on addictions, and he has done ayahuasca.
That's what I did. My other half of my degree was in addiction studies.
Yeah, so he's done those things which have had a real impact on people's desire for substance abuse and all of that. So the point being, you can rewire your brain with external things. But the real significant thing I think you said that I think may not necessarily have an empirical grounding is and it was subtle. So forgive me if I'm making an assertion that isn't true.
No,
but you had said that things that are outside of our body shouldn't affect our brain chemistry and our perception, but they do.
I mean, I'll elaborate that really quick. What I mean is you've got serotonin receptors, okay, and they're there to read serotonin. They're not there to read millions of other molecules, which they can do, by the way. There's literally hundreds of millions of molecules that you could plug into this serotonin receptors. There's 90% of all drugs work on serotonin. So what I'm saying is we evolved not with for some reason randomly the ability for these proteins to read other molecules other than the ones that are released from the presynapse. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Yes,
so it should only read serotonin if you think about it logically.
I want us to talk so that people listening can understand it. So, in other words, so don't feel bad about. I'm not insulted if you say it simplistically or explain it out. So because I think science communication is so important that we need to make sure that people on the widest possible level have the best tools available to do that the unexamined life not worth living. Well, maybe that's an overstatement, but certainly the examined life gives you more of an opportunity to carry out intentional acts if there's any element of free will in our process. So we can certainly use something that is more accurate in terms of predicting behavior to point ourselves in a fulfilling direction if we have more facts. So yeah, please don't feel like you're going to insult me. You won't.
Yeah, I'm like that as well. You could just call me a dickhead right now and I'd just laugh. Yeah, and I wouldn't boot you or anything.
Yeah,
I find it's more uncomfortable for me when people like the guy with the dog face. He said let's not talk about religion, but how many times did he bring it up?
I don't know him personally, but he smelled like a presupposition was he was trying to steer the conversation back to the fact that the only way that you can know things is by God, and that okay, so I understand your position. I don't see it the way you do, and now let's move on. We can talk about other things, but the only other thing you can do is reiterate your positions repetitively and constipate the conversation to the point of uselessness.
Yeah, well, he's been messaging me saying, "Why didn't Joe and and that other guy point out that how rude Brady was being?"
Well,
I mean, if I'm being rude, point it out so I can correct it. But
I didn't see it that way. But
yeah, I was trying to be as kind as I could. Even agree to disagree. Let's learn together. Dialectic.
Yeah, I do not see it the way that he is presenting it, but be that as it may, I'm a flawed perceiver too. I only have a partial, but I am fascinated with this topic that you brought up.
Thank you. And this is why I do. So I did my degree in this field because once I realized that it was probably one of the hardest puzzles to solve, I thought, wow, I've got to try and put some of it together. Yeah. So I basically, a good way to explore consciousness is actually by using non-toxic psychoactive molecules, because you can actually attach like a radioactive ligand to them, and then when you put this into it doesn't have to be a human, it can be a monkey brain, and then you will see where the molecules bind to, and then you map. This is how they map the brain in like a positron emission topography machine. You will be able to see where the radiation is coming from, and then you can tell where all the molecules have gone. And this is how you can map the whole brain, really, because you can find drugs that will fit all these receptors, all 100 trillion of them.
Yeah, that's how Christoph Koch and those guys are doing that up in Washington.
Yeah, Google Maps, like maps, like a GPS maps, because they're the only big hitters who actually do psychoactive research that's trying to solve the mystery of consciousness. Right. But the thing is that they're using Schedule 1 drugs, so they could do a study on like cocaine much easier than a study on mushrooms, which is non-toxic, because cocaine is a Schedule 2 drug in the US, whereas mushrooms is Schedule 1. Same. But yeah, that's part of my addictions course, not the topic of today.
Let me ask you this, if you don't mind just delving into that for 1 sec here. As I understand it, cocaine is an excitotoxin, so like it changes brain physiology in such a way that once you stop doing it, there's almost like a letdown, a how do I recapture the excitement in my life, because you've kind of burnt out the circuits. So I'm trying to use colloquial language to.
Yeah, no, you're saying it just as I might have said it. So basically, what cocaine does is it is an adrenaline and dopamine reuptake inhibitor. So what it does is it goes into where the dopamine and adrenaline are, and there's these little enzymes that recycle these molecules back into the pre-synapse where they get released from, and they're stored there, so your body doesn't waste them. But what cocaine does is it stops the enzymes and it blocks the holes up that they go in, that they get recycled through. So what's going to happen, you're going to keep releasing adrenaline and dopamine naturally, but it can't go anywhere. And so it's just going to float around in the synapse. Then it's going to be more likely to trigger the receptor. And this makes you feel really alert because of the adrenaline. But also, if it was just the adrenaline, you'd have a panic attack. But it's actually releases like 10, 20 times more dopamine than an orgasm, because, it's not the method is actually even more powerful. But cocaine's the most powerful natural stimulant, but it's not as neurotoxic as you may believe. But what you're getting at the end of your comment was is sort of like what happens is if you damage your dopamine system, say, dopamine controls motivation and pleasure, so you actually can't get something called anhedonia, which means lack of pleasure. You can't feel pleasure unless you have an artificial source of it, because you've sort of used up all your dopamine, and it takes weeks to replace it all, because you have to eat certain foods and dopamine's made in the brain, and you need a dopamine to get up in the morning. I advocate natural ways of boosting serotonin and dopamine, but there are ways that you can use. People have this they really are truculent when it comes to say, oh, did you know that cannabis and heroin are non-toxic? Like you can take them every day for your whole life, and you won't get an increased risk of, say, cancer or disease or brain damage. So if you stopped using it, your brain would eventually reach baseline again, because you haven't actually destroyed the neurons and dendrites like amphetamines and cocaine do. And alcohol does that as well.
Right. I do.
Actually, alcohol is one of the worst because it's toxic. It's actually a poison. It's toxic to every cell in the whole body, every single cell.
Yeah, it starts stretching out the insides of your cells. That's why people get cardiomyopathy. I'm never going to pronounce that right, but
all kinds of shit.
Basically, yeah.
And it destroys your brain too. Have you heard of Korsakoff syndrome?
Yes.
A lot of alcoholics get it. They lose sort of speech and balance.
Or starts demyelinating stuff, basically. Yeah, it can cause neurological damage, all of that. Well, the long-term alcoholics, they get the shakes is what.
Yeah. So what you want is a substance that mimics your natural chemistry. So it basically does what serotonin or dopamine naturally does, and it just pretends to be that molecule, right? And so it just goes into the receptor and just unwinds the protein in a different way. Whereas drugs that are harmful, they usually go in and they force all the dopamine out, and then they stop it from being recycled, and that kills the neurons. Yeah, but alcohol is just toxic in itself. It's actually made by yeast to protect themselves from bacteria and stuff.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So the other thing is too, though, we can do things that, when we start working the brain chemistry issue back and forth, that there is another thing that happens in the brain is that if you subject it to a flood of material, sometimes the cells themselves will downregulate, where they won't receive as much. They won't have the capacity to understand the neurotransmitters or little communication words and so forth that talk to the cells. The cells really can't understand what's being said, even though there's a really loud voice in the room, so to speak. So there's elements like that, and I think that we're really not understanding all of the intricacies that are going on when we start doing things with SSRIs and stuff. We have a tendency to just look at the crude outcomes and then make an assessment.
If you look at SSRIs in the empirical literature, like where they'll do meta-analyses, where they'll get like a whole bunch of studies and see what the consensus is, you often find that the side effects are worse than the benefits, or you'll find that in some studies that not quite half, but just almost half, that it's on no better than a placebo. So you give them a sugar pill and tell them it's, I don't know, Prozac, and they'll take it and they'll think they're getting better, but they're just eating sugar. So your brain is what you think you're taking affects how your consciousness is going to develop from there, and that obviously will mean your physical brain structure will change.
Right. It also means too, though, that we actually we are walking medications, in that if you have somebody in your life that you believe and trust, and they tell you something horrible and caustic about yourself, and you believe it, your biology actually produces this chemistry that can indeed have long-term impacts, because a lot of times those things echo over the years and can be.
Oh boy, yes.
And the reverse is true too. If you surround yourself with people who have a vested interest in your success, and you allow that nourishment to come about,
you're a smart guy.
This is where social settings can then become a nourishing garden that feeds you, as opposed to a thorny, toxic desert environment that just sort of pricks you here as you're
just rusty hooks and nails.
So my point being that we can massage this neurotransmitter economy or social landscape inside of our brains by concocting the relationships on our social landscape so that we're actually getting socially nourished. I think social nourishment is every bit, if not, well, I don't know. It's
the thing about social nourishing is it's actually limited, but the thing about hacking in and uploading software into your brain directly with the psychoactive drug is that you're doing it. We don't know what the limits on that are, or how far it can go, how much you can rewire the structure of your brain, and not just the most important parts of the brain too. So I reckon they'll do studies where people can increase their IQ. They'll do studies where you can learn a language quicker. Because some people actually are born with not enough serotonin or not enough dopamine. So these people they're just unlucky. They got the wrong genes, and their brains didn't when the hardware was being made. They didn't get enough of the right molecules, so they actually get depressed. And then this is where your sort of social tuning up comes in. You can fix it with that. This is what therapy is all about. Cognitive behavioral therapy is thinking about your behaviors, and you just by talking to someone, you can change your whole brain structure. But and another good one is meditation and exercise, and as you said, like diet and all that. But but none of them are in the same league as because basically serotonin is a drug. If say our brains used psilocin instead of serotonin, and we took serotonin, it would work like a drug. So our brains basically are like little drug laboratories, and you can increase this or decrease that, and you can predict what effect it will have. And some are obviously better than others. You want one that's non-toxic, and you want one that you don't have to take every day, unless you have to take it every day. Whereas, like heroin, you have to take that every day, or you're going to be having a hell of a time.
Yes.
I don't know. Can I ask you a question?
Sure, as many as you want.
Because I'm just trying to gauge. Because there's this is going to be maybe controversial, but I don't mind. I assume you support medicinal marijuana.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have not only no objection to it. I think we should explore things empirically, and I think
so. You probably want it to be regulated then.
Pardon me?
You want it to be regulated and taxed, right?
Well, I don't know. I'm a bit more anarchistic.
What are your hang-ups about it being regulated and taxed? Maybe I can ease them.
I don't really have hang-ups about them being regulated and taxed. I'm just saying of things that are optimal. I think people should be able to do what it is they see fit, but that we should equip each other with as much information as possible. That isn't right. That's all.
Yeah, and that's the problem. People, when they do the national drug surveys in Australia, the second most dangerous drug people report is cannabis, which is absurd because it's not. It's like way down the list. It's almost the safest.
Australia has a ridiculous notion of it. It is quite parochial in some senses.
Yeah, we are backwards. We haven't even got medical cannabis here yet, and you guys have got some states legalizing it. But next year, we're doing the first trial or pilot study of terminally ill patients. We're giving them cannabis. But this wasn't my controversial question. I was just testing the waters. Mm-hmm. My real question is, do you support, say, the policies in the Netherlands, the UK, Switzerland, Holland, Germany, where they actually prescribe heroin for people who want to use heroin? And I'll tell you, the evidence shows. I actually did an essay on this one. And the evidence shows, if you look at like the meta-analyses, that the pilot studies were a huge success because these were people who'd failed all other treatments and they kept going back to prison, right? And they kept robbing people. So if you just give them what they want, maybe they'll stop all this bad stuff. And it turns out that almost all of them sort of, they don't get back to completely normal lives, but a lot of them get jobs even, whereas when they were on methadone or some other substitute, they weren't doing that.
Yeah. Can I
Sorry,
ask
no,
you? Can I
go
ask
for
you?
it.
When is the controversial question coming?
Damn, man, you're hard to shake. Okay, okay. Do you? No, sorry. Let me follow up. Do you support those policies?
Emphatically, yeah. I think that. In fact, I think that the social perception of it. In other words, there's certain social constructs. Cocaine was not necessarily viewed as terrible. The founding fathers, so to speak, in the U.S. Did it all of the time, and as they called it snuff or whatever, and it was socially acceptable. It never caused anybody to crash. It never caused them, and they didn't have as much access to things medical that we do in the modern world. So even then, but my point being that our stigma is probably one of the worst aspects, and many people that are addicted.
Stigma, you're right.
Yeah, it's the stigma that's the problem, and I think that the reason that it was stigmatized to begin with was probably out of fear. I'm sure, with the background in psychology,
fear and racism
are familiar with breaching experiments. We are far more attracted to what is familiar. And we use that as an axiom for in-group and out-group in lots of ways that are not intrinsically, like you wouldn't write it down that you feel this way. But if somebody stands the wrong way on an elevator, people get uncomfortable. Or if somebody
I do that just to amuse myself.
Yeah, if somebody
confuse people.
Yeah, but if somebody sweeps the street in a suit and tie, people get upset. There's physical, visceral reactions to things that are unfamiliar. And evolutionarily speaking, I'm sure it's because we have to pay attention to that unusual thing because it might, eviscerate and eat us.
Yeah.
So all that to say, that human hack that we have has us sort of with this tribalistic bias for what we're familiar with. It is horrible for us to eat dogs, let's say, but that's a natural thing for certain other places in the world.
Yeah.
And
in China, it's normal.
Right. In certain parts, yes. Yeah. So my point being that that the evilness of drugs, I think, was a social construct due to either fear or, in the case of marijuana, control by the people who had the lumber industry nailed down.
Actually, that's interesting that you've brought that up. But the people forget that drugs have only been illegal for 100 years. 100 years ago, everything was good to go. The first drugs to become illegal, one was heroin in the Harrison Act in 1914, and that banned heroin and cocaine, except for medicinal uses. But it was what the justifications they gave for banning them. In the case of cocaine, this is actually true. It's in my textbooks. They were worried that black people were using cocaine and seducing white people. So they used a racist argument to prop up their propaganda of this and the stigma, basically. And then for heroin, they basically used, that's what no one uses that except junkies and doctors, so we don't need to care about that. And it's just it's a nasty thing to do. And a lot of Chinese people were using opium at the time. Right. So opium was the first to get banned in like 1869, I think, in California. And then cannabis got banned later in like 1930. They didn't ban it straight out. What they did was they taxed it so much that you had to buy a tax stamp that cost you, so you lost money every time you wanted to retail it. And then in 1971, they really got serious and they banned everything.
Right.
And now it's coming the other way. It's turning around. I'm amazed that it's actually happened.
Yeah, I think we do need to do something more empirically based and not just.
That's it. Yeah. This is what I always tell people when they say, well, what policy do you advocate then? And I say, empirical evidence-based drug policy. Whatever the evidence shows, let's do it.
I think we are woefully inadequate in translating what we have already learned about human psychology and sociology. That it should impact far more our, like for instance, our justice system and so forth. There are people who can cognitively understand that something is wrong, but cannot behaviorally prevent themselves from doing it. Why? Because of the connections, the way the connections are made in the
Or impulse control, perhaps.
Right. We wouldn't have capgras disorder, where you think your family is imposters, if there weren't like those synaptic connections or whatever those transmission lines are.
Those are serotonin and dopamine all over. That's what causes mental illnesses. Schizophrenia is dopamine and serotonin, depression, anxiety, adrenaline, serotonin. These are the three key players in the frontal cortex.
Right. And well, there's a microbiome connection to that too, you might want to look into. But be that as it may, my point being that if your brain doesn't have the entire community of compartments, the organs inside the brain, these little compartments that have little areas that do language, and you have little areas that emote and that connect that emotion to your higher cognitive thoughts. And if those things aren't connected, your little interpreter goes haywire, and you'll start making up there have been people, and just to stick on the capgras disorder thing, there have been people that have felt like their family members were replaced with exact duplicates because the brain is trying to make sense of the fact that you're not feeling the person walk in the room, so that there have been murders and things like that have occurred. With
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Read Oliver Sacks stuff, like the man.
Oh, I have. Yeah, I have read a little bit of his work, actually.
The man who
I love what he does.
Yeah, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. I believe that's one of the. but
yeah, it happens all the time.
With that in mind, though, my point here is that the things that even are known have not effectively been translated into how they should affect our institutional awareness and function as a society. And so people that do the empirical evidence need to have at the forefront some very powerful communicators, like Carl Sagan-esque communicators, to help people that don't have an understanding of certain implications of the research, to help them to understand those implications. And we're woefully inadequate at that, because if that were true, we would see behaviors as, destructive behaviors as wounds and starvation, the result of wounds, of actual, toxins and/or brain physiology problems, etc., as opposed to this crime and punishment mentality that we.
It's not a criminal problem; it's a health issue.
It is.
And I'm so glad that you agree, because so many Americans they're not. I mean, there's a few liberal states, but you look at like where all the Republicans are, the red belt. I don't know what you call it, the buckle belt or whatever, the Bible Belt. Yeah.
The groin area of the body of Christ. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that'll do. Yeah, dude. What's the communityprinciple.com?
That is just if what I do is I take the axiom, whether it's true or not, as reality itself is linguistic, and if you use that as the lens with which to look at it, then you start beginning to see the language of things that cooperate together are better. Like if you have fishing hooks and you can make them and I can make fishing line, we can both go fishing. So if we have a vested interest in each other's success, we can have a better experience of life. Now, that's basically the community principle in a nutshell. So what I try to do is
you should link it with cross-link it with my community.
Okay.
We could just help each other. I mean, I've done that with, the Dr. Evil guy who was on here. Me and him have done that heaps. It's been really good.
Okay, I would be happy to do that. So yeah, I have your time locked in here, and I will certainly do that. I don't know. That should probably be an offline discussion. I mean,
yeah, of course. We'll just breeze over that for now. I'll take that up with you later on, man. What Is it 5:20 in the morning over here?
Oh my goodness. You have to. So you're 12 hours off. That's what you get from the bottom of the world. So.
Yeah, time goes slower when you live in Australia.
It does. It does. But this has been a great conversation. I do appreciate the fact that you're bringing it out.
Yeah, well, I want to host more. I haven't done live ones, but the live ones are fun because you get to meet like different people. And but yeah, I'm gonna plan to have a whole host. But the YouTube channel I've just set up. I've had the Google Plus communities for a while. Then I tried doing a blog, and I'd be writing for like 6 hours and post it. But then you do a video one, and it's so much easier.
It is. It is. But I do think that you could structure the guests so that they're on topic. You know, I felt like it was a confrontation more than a conversation at the first part of it. So.
Yeah, and I'm not big on banning people from if they join. You know, like I'll just mute their mic if they keep offending. You know, people randomly. I mean, basically, they just embarrass themselves, I think. I'm
not judge necessarily. I think that our conversation has been very productive from my perspective.
Oh, I've loved it.
Yeah, I could be off. You know, we could both be deluded. But the point being, we traded ideas, and both of us shared with each other. And I think anybody listening would gain from that. And that's what I think the value of these types of things are.
If the conversation doesn't roll on, it just stagnates and stops.
Yes.
You got to keep it. You got to keep the discussion up. Always trying to improve it or find the best answer. I think that's how I approach things. I've got to go, man. I'm probably gonna chill out for a while, but I'll go and look you up. All right.
Well, yeah, I appreciate the.
Have you ever hosted one of these things before?
Yes.
You have? All right. You can give me some tips on how to do the next one.
How about if you just take this offline and then I can.
Yeah.
Trade.
I'll just hit stop broadcast then. Yep. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and this has been 3FS TV's Google Live Hangouts. Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Dr. Evil, and thanks, Dickhead. James, that's your name, sorry. Thanks, everyone, especially you, Joe. Take care.
My pleasure.